And we are live. Once again, we're back with the Mind Meld PR vlog. I'm your host, Jonathon Narvey, the founder of Mind Meld PR. And today I have a fun topic, how to talk to anyone about anything. And to talk about that topic, I brought in a special guest, William Johnson, who works with Innovate BC. And I've known William for a number of years, so full disclosure, we're friends. And beyond that, William is just a, how can I put this? He's a smooth talker. He just always seems to know the right thing to say, whether he's in in an in-person discussion or in front of a crowded room full of hundreds of people. So I thought, who better to talk about this topic than William? So I've sketched out a very brief introduction of who William Johnson is. But William, why don't you do us the honor of giving us a little bit more background? Why are you the host with the most?
Hey, Jonathan, thanks for having me on here. I don't know if I'm the host with the most, but I will say that I am one of your friends. You got that part right. Thanks for having me on here. Day job, I work for Innovate BC. I'm the director of marketing and communications there. Innovate BC is a crown agency here in BC. We help tech companies start, stay, and scale in British Columbia. I also write a technology newsletter called the Vancouver Tech Journal. It goes out every Sunday at 6 a.m. You can subscribe to that newsletter and you don't have to subscribe to any others. I also, outside of work, do a lot of writing and interviewing people. I've written for Maclean's, Beta Kid, Daily Hive, BC Business, etc. And then whenever we are not in lockdown under coronavirus, I go to a lot of events, and one of the things I'm involved in is Tech Vancouver, and I host those monthly events where generally it's a different tech executive or founder within the city where I'm doing a lot of interviews and hosting and emceeing, and I think that's where Jonathan gets the idea that I'm good at hosting or talking, whatever, is through those activities. So, but to be honest, Jonathan, I hate whenever I go to an event and people ask me, oh, so what do you do? You know, it's always one of those questions that make people self-conscious sometimes. Whenever I go to an event, I like to ask people like, you know, why did you come here? Or, you know, what brings you here tonight? Or is this the first event you have been to of these? And that usually sparks up a more interesting conversation than what do you do? So maybe this is my first contribution to this conversation about talking to people about stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a great tip. And so I should provide a bit of background, actually, just a second for those listening. Why are we even covering this topic? Well, we like to cover topics that are of interest to those looking to do PR and marketing activities, and communication is really a central thing, a central skill for that kind of role. If schmoozing is part of your job, or even if it's not, but generally communication is good for getting ahead with just about anything you want to do. Today we're going to cover some ground of what tactics and strategies we use day to day, and hopefully you'll find them useful. So I think, William, that was a great way to kick off with, talking about, ask them, beyond what you do, but trying to, what brings you out here is, that's asking something, I guess, not on a deeper level, but on maybe a more interesting level. Do you want to talk a bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. Again, when I ask, what brings you out to this event tonight, or is this your first? I'm looking for an answer that includes, why this event right now, right? You can go to a tech event any night of the week in Vancouver, right? Thriving tech scene, there are events, well, again, except for right now, obviously. But to be honest, there's a Zoom call every half an hour that you can join. But whenever we're out at events, you can go to a tech event anytime. And when I ask that question, I'm curious, like, it's why are you here right now? Are you working on something specific? And if so, let's talk about that. And I want to know if for that person, whatever their current ambitions are, whether it's with their work or their personal life or something they're learning, like, is this event that they're currently at a piece of the puzzle for them in terms of, does my current network satisfy my ambitions, or am I growing my network because the people I currently spend time with, I need to move past them, or I need to make a specific connection, or perhaps they're just there for the speaker, right? Like one of the most recent Tech Vancouver events was Ryan Holmes. Everyone knows the CEO of Hootsuite. A lot of people who had never come to a Tech Vancouver event knew who Ryan Holmes was and heard what he had been up to a long time and just thought, oh, that's a high profile speaker. I want to go to that. There were other people, though, who specifically had a product they were working on, right? So then you get that whole story. So again, every one of those events, I have many stories like that and conversations with people.
I think it's a really good way to get that, get people to talk about themselves without necessarily getting into some deep issues of who are you and what is it that you do. Particularly at those events, people may be on the cusp of something, and they're sort of in between career moves, or they're in startup mode and they're not quite sure how to define themselves. So I think that's a good in. So I should give I want to give a little bit of background, my own experience with speaking. Prior to being in public relations, where part of the job is schmoozing, I was a reporter for a number of years, and so conducting interviews, it was always useful to be able to figure out how to get people to open up, trust you, build credibility. But speaking in front of an audience, William, you have way more, I feel like you have more gravitas, more of a natural ability for that than I do. I actually went to Toastmasters a few years back because I knew that was a skill that I kind of lacked a little bit. And the funny thing, I don't know if you've ever been to a Toastmasters event, but
I haven't.
I had completely the wrong idea. I thought that I was going to show up on the first day and everyone was going to be this amazing speaker. And turns out we all sucked in our own special way. And that's how you learn from each other, because most human beings, this is, public speaking is not a natural thing. It's a hard thing to do. And that's, this goes to, there just might not be a whole lot of upside for you, or compared with the possible downside of screwing up and, totally ruining your reputation. And there's so much risk or perceived risk involved. I don't know. How do you have a tip for feeling and seeming natural and confident when you're on stage there?
Yeah, I'd say I'd have a couple, but they might not be revolutionary. I remember when I first started public speaking, I guess it was in high school, but when I really got into it, it was in university in Ottawa. And back in the day, I was giving presentations on why university students should get a LinkedIn account. So I guess it was before everyone just had one naturally. And I remember going up for those presentations and my heart was pounding. Like, I was very nervous giving those presentations. But I had to do it as part of the job I had with the university. And because I didn't have a choice, I just kept doing it. And what do you know? The more you work on something, the better you get at it, right? The more natural it becomes to you. So I think that's one of the secrets for everything. You got to put yourself in the position. You have to repeat things, right? There's a really good, I don't know who it is. I think it's Jen Sincero. I've never heard of her. She's an author anyway. If you want to live a life that you've never lived, you have to do things you've never done. Like, it's very basic. But people forget that you have to put yourself in that position over and over and over again, and then eventually you just get over it. The other thing for me is I'm generally speaking, and I generally know at least one person in the audience. And even if it's just one person, I almost check in with that person, every minute or every couple minutes. And generally, because it's something I know, they're just big smile on their face, beaming, and that's kind of like the acknowledgement that you're doing all right. So just keep going, right? So a lot of the Tech Vancouver events, obviously, I've been hosting them for a while, so I know many of the people in the audience. So actually, I make an effort to make eye contact with people that I know, and that really helps for sort of just the positive reinforcement. Just keep going. This is natural. You're having a conversation with people you know. These are your folks, so don't stress about it.
That's a technique that I use as well when I'm speaking to a larger group. It's funny, you hear that old bit of advice, just imagine everyone's naked. That never works for me.
Horrible advice.
Yeah. It's like, oh, what could be a more awkward, weird situation to put yourself in? A room full of naked people. I don't want to be in that room. So
yeah, it's horrible advice.
yeah.
The other thing I'd say is I guess at the beginning of most of the engagements that I'm involved in where I'm speaking, I always try and disarm the audience with some form of humor. I think that's very, very powerful. Like if you can get everyone to laugh, like if you're a comedian, right? You can get everyone to laugh, like that first joke or the first time you get like a good group of people laughing, like it's like, oh, okay, now like everyone here accepts me. We can continue on with the show. So if you ever go to a Tech Vancouver event, I'll generally make at least one joke in the introductions, whether it's related to news or whatever. Just because once I get that first laugh, I think, oh, okay, cool. Or, I'm among friends here.
The funny thing is, when you're making that joke, like it doesn't have to be a barn burner, just an amazing joke that a famous stand-up comic would do. Like it can be the corniest line, but because everybody's on your side, they want you to succeed. It can be as simple as, hey, I've got good news and I've got bad news. And, the good news is, and you make like some announcement that's, the good news is we've got Ryan Holmes speaking tonight. And the bad news is I forgot my lunch. Like something stupid, corny. You could literally say anything. They will start laughing.
I think right. I think audiences are pretty generous with their laughter.
Yeah. And it doesn't hurt that typically at those events, you're serving beers beforehand. So hey, even easier.
Well, I forgot to mention that I always have a beer before I
go. Yeah, I think it's a little liquid courage can't hurt, but I try not to rely on it. But yeah, it is what it is. Hey, there's another trick that I use when I want to engage people a little bit more in what I'm saying. I pretend I'm in a movie. I don't know if you've ever tried this. It makes life interesting.
I haven't, but I want to hear about that.
I ask, first I'll just ask a question or make a statement and sort of, dramatic pause. And I don't know, I clued into this. I was watching, I'm a fan of The Walking Dead, and I never took a screenwriting class. I never, drama was never that big. And then I'm just watching the show. It was a couple of years back, and I realized, oh my God, the key to dialogue is just, it's a bit unnatural, but seems natural. And it was just this one line. This dude is staring off into the distance at some there's monsters out there, and he's like, "That's how." And the other character is like, "How what?" And now, that character is interested. The audience is interested. What do you mean? And injecting things like that. So I'll do stupid stuff. Well, I guess it's not that stupid, but another thing I use to engage along similar lines. There's two kinds of people in this world. And instantly it's like, what do you mean? Oh, you're about to impart some kind of wisdom. And again, it can be something silly like, there's people who record podcasts and there's people who don't. And, it's the lead up again, people will tend to be pretty forgiving, whether you're one-on-one or in a group.
Yeah, totally. And I think, yeah, I like some of those statements you can actually say in any situation, and they'll stimulate conversation. Like the two types of people in this world, like you can say it in a meeting, obviously, and there's people who run a good meeting, people who run a bad meeting, right? And we do it in terms of public speaking, or you can do it in terms of before I build something with IKEA furniture, and I've got all the screws and nails laid out perfectly before I begin. There's obviously a group of people who would do that, and then there's a group of people who would not do that, right? The people who would, when they finish building the IKEA furniture, who have stuff left, and there's a group of people who are going to worry about that, and there's a group that are not. Oh, that's just extra stuff. We're not going to worry about that, right? So for sure.
I think it's a fun way to frame things because it's so, partly because it's so on its face untrue. There are obviously hundreds of different kinds of people.
Yeah.
So you're framing things in a completely bogus way that it's like, oh, well, this has to be something. So that's fun. And then I think, this topic is really, how to talk to anyone about anything. I think, I want to cover a little bit of ground around people, giving bad news, or giving maybe, you want to give criticism, but be seen to be giving constructive criticism. So I don't know. I guess maybe this is almost commonplace now, but I like to use the compliment sandwich.
I guess I have a modification on that, but go talk about what you do primarily, and then I'll give you my tweak.
Okay, yeah, I mean it's super simple. Like let's say I'm talking with a member of my team. You did such an amazing job the other day on XYZ. I love that. The client loved it. Hey, there was just one thing I thought we could do even better. Blah 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 blah. And okay, yeah, and yeah, and I'm sure you'll anyways you'll get it done because yeah, I've seen you do this kind of work before, and you're a natural at it. Something like that. I think I probably made it a little more awkward than it needed to be, but you go ahead. What's your different take on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, everyone knows the compliment sandwich. I think people call it the shit sandwich. Am I allowed to
I
say
don't
that
like
on
that one as much. Not as tasty.
PG, yeah, 13 podcast? I guess mine is an open face sandwich, and I'll tell you why. Right, so you put on the piece of bread, right? That's the compliment. So it mirrors what you've said, and then you drop in let's say the protein, right? Could be turkey or chicken or whatever, right? Which ironically that's like the best part of the sandwich, but in this case it's the bad news. It's the we need to improve here, right? And then I don't think for me I actually necessarily put then here's the positive reinforcement final slice. I think for me it's more of and to continue the food analogy, it's more of like salt, which is a flavor enhancer. So you've got, hey, you've done great with this. And then you say, hey, I think we really need to work on this part of it. And then the last thing is actually, I read this really good book, which talks about these three things. You might find it valuable whenever you're tackling this problem, right? So the last thing is not actually another, hey, you're great and you're going to succeed. It's actually here's this other thing that's going to help you think about this whole piece of work. So again, slightly different, but yeah.
I think that's a good tip, and it's connected to another thing I wanted to bring up in terms of respecting your audience, whether it's one-on-one or in a group. And by respecting your audience, I'm not talking about being polite. I mean like anticipate and understand and expect that they know at least as much as you do, or maybe more. That they are relatively technically on board with what you're saying. And this applies even more in a one-on-one situation where, you start throwing out names and books you've read and things like that. And, what do you know? If they don't know what you're talking about, they'll just be like, who's that? They'll ask you. But I think people appreciate it when you don't always talk to them at what's the rule in an eighth grade reading level, communicating at them at that level.
Yeah. So it's super interesting that you say that, because I think that varies across maybe disciplines or departments sometimes. Like I find so I run a marketing and comms department, and, often the case, me or someone on my team will think, why do these people in this other department not understand like how great this thing is we're doing? You know what I mean? And it's because, we put so much thought into it, and we understand the value of, it could be a story or something, right? And we have what is often referred to as the curse of knowledge, right? It's like we understand this so thoroughly that we can't imagine that someone else doesn't get this. And so sometimes I think it's tricky there. As much as you don't want to, treat people like, they're 6-year-olds. I find sometimes, again, this is marketing and comms department. We can overestimate how much people do understand.
Yeah.
You have to know your audience, right? You need to really think about that.
Yeah, knowing your audience is key. And so that's sort of the flip side of what I was saying. And so thanks for bringing that up, where it's, it's human nature to project your mind, your way of thinking onto others in a, and you can do it without realizing it. Where, you just assume everyone knows what you know. You can't imagine not knowing the thing that you know. You don't remember what it was like to not know that thing. So, I think it's, it's important to, I guess I would say, my caveat to respecting the audience and respecting the person you're speaking with is read the room. So, if you're whether it's one-on-one or you're just, if you're seeing a lot of blank faces, or, suddenly a lot of people just start going on their cell phones, maybe you've gone off in a direction where people just are no longer relating to what you're saying. You need to get back onto firmer ground.
Yeah, I think what you said about reading the room is really, really important. And another thing, just in terms of if you're talking and you want people to listen, just don't just dump information on people. I think one of the most important thing for public speaking or selling ideas is, again, you do public relations, so I don't have to tell you this, but maybe the listeners is, like, tell a good story. Like, I can remember a story someone tells me, no matter what it's about, if it's sort of framed the right way, and there's a narrative that I can latch onto.
Yeah, I think that just goes to the way human beings have been bred to remember stuff.
Mm-hmm.
is through stories. And so everyone can recount the tale of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, probably telling it in like virtually the same set of facts, the porridge and the beds and all, and all the rest of it in the exact same sequence. And okay, I mean, I could see maybe your mom, had repeated that story to you multiple times. So, okay, fair enough. But that is just the way we remember. So you can probably, I'll give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
You think of a character maybe who has given a speech in a TV show or a movie, and it's kind of hard to remember, what would they have actually said versus, say, banter between two people. That's better. And then even better is, you're seeing some action. So action and talk between a few people, and you're following the sequence of events, and you can really recount in detail what happens in a scene, in a movie, on a TV show, or if you're telling a story, just make sure you include those details: the person's name, the their what were they doing, and details sell the story, and details cement the memory.
Yeah, totally get you. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess I'll put my journalist hat on, just like you, Jonathan. Actually, no, I would never call myself a journalist. I think people are really picky with that term, so I'll just go with writer, which is like a step down, I think.
I don't think. Can I stop you there for a second? Because your work has appeared in, if I'm not mistaken, it's BC Business and Business in Vancouver. And did you have? I think there's been some other high-profile pieces that did you wrangle a Globe and Mail byline?
No. So it's funny. It's funny. This is the funniest thing again about people. So back in 2012, I wrote an article for Maclean's, actually, and even then I was like, "Oh, I'm not a writer. Like, how dare I call myself that?" Right? Honestly, it wasn't until like 2 years ago that I was like, "Oh, okay, I guess I can say I'm a writer now," which is just a funny thing about people. But yeah, anyway, writer hat on. Got a question for you. When you're talking to executives of companies, obviously you're not afraid to do that anymore. You've been doing it for years. But for someone who's new to that, whether it's someone with an idea or someone who is a startup or it's a PR person pitching, like how do you approach that? How do you respect like the level that this person is at, but you're not downgrade yourself, like I'm not worthy to talk to this person. How dare I? And how do you get their attention, right? How do you get people to respond to emails?
Yeah, great question. So how do you get people to so I think it's number one, how do you have the confidence to approach them, and number two, how do you get them on board with the conversation? I think that's what you're saying, but we can so number one, to do, in terms of confidence in approaching high-powered executives, just you have to approach it from the perspective of just be fearless, pretend. Well, you're not really pretending. I mean, if you're all human beings, and but for certain happenstances of chance, in terms of perhaps who you're connected to, what kind of schooling you went to, and all sorts of chances beyond your control, you might switch places, in some alternate reality. So I'm never intimidated by anyone I'm speaking to, because we're all human beings. And so the way I approach it is just, I am about to enter a conversation with someone who knows something that I don't. Otherwise, why am I talking to them? So there's a few things I will do to prepare for that. Number one, I got to do my research into the person, into the company, into what they've done lately, so that I'm not going to go in and make a fool of myself, and I'm not going to waste their time. And I think that's key, is just ask them interesting questions. Try to ask them questions that maybe they haven't heard before, not in an attempt to mess them up or catch them unprepared, but just to be interesting. So I'm a real fan of the Eric Weinstein podcast, The Portal, where he'll talk to people, and one of the objectives of that show is just to introduce people to new ways of thinking, and to do that, even in a 1.5 hour show, he has to get past the entry level kind of conversation that this person could have done a million times before and ask, the higher level discussions. So he'll actually get kind of mad at his guests, like overtly annoyed, and just be like, Joe, yeah, we're not talking about that right now. I'm not having that conversation with you. You can have that conversation with anyone. We're talking about this. Are you ready? Okay, good. And he'll do that, and it's so fun to see. And every time the guest is not offended, the guest is thankful. Oh, finally, I get to have this higher level conversation. I never get to talk to anyone about this thing, and I get to answer questions that are different. And so, in contrast, you'll see Entertainment Tonight will be on, and you'll see an interview with a famous movie star, and the interviewer asks them something like, yeah, so what was it like working with this actor on this movie? Or they'll ask them, so what is this movie about? And it's like, come on, like they've already answered this in 1,000 other interviews before you even got there. So try to be interesting and engage with people on a higher level, and if only to keep yourself interested. I think that's part of it.
Oh yeah, I think you're so right. I really think people appreciate I know you're saying higher level, but maybe I would say like deeper level. Is that it's
Yeah.
Same thing, but I totally get what you're saying. And I have listened to Eric Weinstein's podcast, and you got it spot on. It's pretty incredible, actually.
So yeah, I think. Well, I mean, you've had that, like you reaching out to high-powered people, executives and visionaries and leaders. Do you have any tactics or tips for interacting with people? And yet, you always seem so natural, William. So, go ahead.
To be honest, Jonathan, you honestly summarized my approach really well, and also my thinking, which is, this is just some other person. Like, what would I be afraid about reaching out to this person or emailing this person or saying hi to this person at an event? It's just another person, like whatever, like they're in my role some other time. You know what I mean? Like, so there's no intimidation factor there at all. And the other thing you mentioned was you research. Like, cannot stress enough the value of research. Not everyone has to be like me and be like, research people before you go to an event where you might bump into them. But I have gone networking events or like dinners and stuff. Or I went to MetaBridge, which is this like tech CEO retreat in Kelowna, and it was just like CEOs and me, like literally. And I'm using literally the way it's supposed to be used, not like it was almost CEOs. It was actually, you can only go to that event if you're a CEO. But I got to go because MAPC sponsors the event. But I wasn't a CEO. But before I went, I researched everyone. So that when I went up to someone and saw, oh, okay, this is who this person is, I actually knew who they were and what their company was and what would be relevant to them when I bumped into them. Not everyone has to do that, but I actually did do that. So the fact that you talked about research, I actually think is really, really, really important. I actually really like your point about asking them questions that, like, people get asked the same stuff all the time. And I actually find that sometimes, really serious questions or deeper questions throw people off, but then you're right. They appreciate it afterwards. And even if I'm like with my group of best friends, someone says something like, oh, like, this politician's so stupid. Generally people say, oh yeah, so crazy, and it's like some really light stuff. I'll just be like, why do you think that? And
that's such a great question to ask.
Right? It's like, usually people aren't asked that. You don't have to explain yourself. Right?
Yeah. So this is actually, it's treading on some interesting territory right there that, because I love asking that question. Why do you think that? Or how do you know that? Or, where did you see that? Because suddenly you're forcing them to, do I just believe that? Is that something I have been told, but
Or did they just read it?
yeah, so you can, if you're with the right kind of person who is at least a little bit introspective, you can actually get into some interesting uh, um, talks there. But I also want to. Maybe this is a tip for, not something you should do, but something you should be careful of. I have a bad habit when I'm at parties in particular. And I've had a couple drinks, and I get into this mood where I just want to create chaos, and so I guess I don't have a name for this, but I envision it like I I'm throwing a cow into a river full of piranhas just to watch the frenzy. So sometimes I'll just say stuff, often political, sometimes cultural, just nothing like overtly offensive, but uh, you know I mean, I guess the obvious example, I could include the word Trump in anything. Hey, did you see Trump? Blah 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 blah. Blah. And in a positive sense, you just leave it to their imagination, and just watch heads explode and people shout and scream. And it's very entertaining. But I often don't get invited back to the same parties.
Well, Jonathan, you hit on something though, which is that like people go to networking events sometimes, or dinners, or receptions, or parties, and they don't know how to strike up a conversation. And again, we're talking about like how to talk to people about anything. I don't think there's anything wrong with like throwing out a lightning rod topic. There's nothing wrong with that at all to me. You can get so much conversation out of it.
Yeah, I think it's well, yeah. When it works really well, it is actually a jumping off point for a very interesting conversation. So you have to
Mm-hmm.
have people who are, um, I guess, skilled in the art of conversation, where um, they're not afraid to think out loud. I think that's the thing that's it's harder to do these days, where we're kind of de-incentivized to think out loud because you're taking a risk. you know y- you're
Mm-hmm.
you're literally letting the thoughts fly for the first time without much of a filter. And I guess you have to have a certain amount of trust, even with people you've just met at that event, that they're not going to tear your throat out for just thinking out loud. Do you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, but I think it's just so important for society and dialogue and ideas to have people sharing. One of the reasons I write is because that's what allows me to think. So I write. So I have something in my head and I write it down. And you know what? It doesn't look good the first time, right? It's not good the first time. That's what you're talking about. It's like you say something, it's like, oh shit, like why did you say that? You know what I mean? But now that it's out there, people can hear it, and we can all inspect it, and we can manipulate it. And then, oh, now your ideas have self-expanding capabilities that you didn't know about because other people are contributing now,
Mm.
right? So the discussion and the dialogue. And again, I feel the same thing happens when I write. I write something, but it's a shitty first draft. But now that it's out there, and it's like, okay, it's fine, it's out there, and it might not be good. Now I can play with this thing. Now we can tweak this and manipulate it.
Yeah. And I think, part of the incentive for engaging in that kind of behavior is just to be original. Like one of my rules for engaging with people, whether it's in person or in front of a big group, I try to never say something that everybody is saying. If you're not saying something original, maybe a little bit contentious, edgy, I feel like, well, what, you're just wasting people's time, because they could have seen that in a nightly newscast for the 10th time in a row. They
Mhm.
could have, heard the exact same joke again. So I guess part of it is to be, you know, uh, to make an impact in a conversation, to be memorable, you have to be original, and that requires a bit of risk taking.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, I think that probably it must tie a little bit to your work, right? In terms of you're telling stories for clients, but you know, why would you go out with something that is not new or not notable or that has already been said? Like what would be the point of going out with that, right?
Well, I think there is a well understood incentive to toe the line, and this is we see this play out on nightly talk shows where I've seen this change over the years since, and I'm dating myself a little bit here, but I used to watch Jay Leno, and even when I was super young, Johnny Carson, and uh, the point.
I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
So the point of those late night shows was make the audience laugh, and instead the last 5, 6, maybe 8 years longer, there's been a transition from laughing to clapping. And it's like trained seals, and it's like, okay, and you're achieving these effects through different methods. So a joke, or you're using humor. Typically it's you say something that's, it gets people up on guard a little bit, you're creating some tension, and then you relieve it by just saying something completely absurd, and so people, again, that's how you sort of get people on your side, is, oh, thank God he's versus lately, you tune into, I'm not going to name shows, but well, they're all the same now. So yeah, it's like the audience claps after the usually the guy says something that everybody agrees with, and it's like, okay, that is a mode, and I think you can have a very loyal audience who's very happy with you if you do that. But I don't know, for my own purpose, I don't want to be that guy. I want to be memorable, and I guess maybe that's, I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that? Because there are risks with trying to be original.
Yeah, I think it goes back to similar to what I was saying. I love, again, this is me personally. I love hearing new things. Like, what am I doing here if not to like discover new things, new ideas, and the original stuff. I have no problem with it. It's funny. I've never actually heard anyone describe what you have described that way, and I think you're spot on. I watch shows like Bill Maher and like Jimmy Kimmel, and like these are all just like typical like American Democrats criticizing Trump. Like that's like nothing new, right? You're right, and they're all men. It's like every talk show is a man. I see an old white guy, right? Yeah. And they all pretty much are on the same page, and yeah, they'll do their like mini soliloquies or rants, and everyone claps. So it's really funny that you've just described that, because you're spot on.
Okay, well, there you go. We managed to achieve something original. It took some doing, took some work on both of our parts. I appreciate that. Look, I think we could talk about this topic for days, but I know you've already been very generous with your time. I guess, do you have any other final tips, tactics, strategies that really work well for you, maybe day to day, with your team, or what final golden nugget of advice would you provide?
So I'll recommend a book. It's a book that my best friend recommended to me that I read. I forget when I read it, but I feel like it's required reading for anyone in communications and marketing, and honestly, almost anyone. And it's called Made to Stick. I don't know if you've ever heard that book. And it's basically about how to make ideas sticky. And it obviously goes beyond that. And they have a framework. It's like a sticky idea framework throughout it. And it's the things that you need to think about when you're communicating someone. And it could be in business, it could be in your personal life, it could be in an ad, it could be in a PR campaign. And their framework is an acronym that spells success, basically. Almost success without the last S. And so it goes, the ideas need to be simple, unexpected, concrete, credentialed, emotional, and a story involved. And again, like you said, I could talk another 40 minutes with you just on that. But instead, you should just think about those things when you're communicating ideas, and then also encourage your viewers to go buy that book, Made to Stick.
Yeah. That's great. So I want to follow up with that with two things. Number one, I wish I could remember the name of the book, but I'm sure you can Google it. It's or there's probably a number of books that are like this. I think this was around the time that I started doing Toastmasters. I got turned on to a book that it was just business stories. It was like 100 stories that you can use in business. And so the whole idea there is, if you're not a natural storyteller, or just you don't have a whole ton of life experience, maybe you're in your 20s, just recently graduated, you don't really have a lot of war stories to share. Well, lucky for you, plenty of people have documented interesting stories. You can get like the best of Warren Buffett, or Elon Musk. You can just sort of read his Twitter and there's all kinds of interesting stories just with that guy that you can shape for whatever purpose you want to use. And so when I'm using a story in conversation, typically I'll just go right into it without, the moral of the story becomes clear in time. I don't kick it off with, I think X, this reminds me of a story, blah, blah, blah. No, I just kick off with a story, and gradually people sort of cotton on to what I'm getting at. And so that's a good tactic. And then a good book that I read, which is ancient, but lots of good wisdom in there, How to Win Friends and Influence People. And I read it years and years after, is it Dale Carnegie? Maybe.
Yeah.
So I read it years after I guess I'd already started in a career path of marketing and public relations, and I wish I'd read it years earlier. And it's not like the advice in that book is particularly you can't find it elsewhere, like things like compliment people when you first meet them, remember their name, things, really basic stuff, but it's like, you know what? This is handy, and it's not for. I guess in one sense, it's the art of persuading people, which some people could take as the art of manipulating people. But I guess when it comes down to it, do you want to get what you want, or do you not want to get what you want?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's a book called The Art of Persuasion. I'm pretty sure. It's really good. And I have another thing for you before we go.
Oh, go ahead.
Maybe two things. This next tip might be, I don't know if it's a good tip or a bad tip. So my best friend hates it whenever it's funny, he hates it when I cite people. I have a good memory where I can read something, a book or whatever, an article, and I can tell you the journalist and like exact quotes pretty easily. And I guess it's a problem because I'll do that a lot, and he'll be like, "Oh, you're just name dropping," right? And I say, "Oh, well, I'm just telling you where I heard this idea, right? I think that's valuable for people, right?"
Yeah,
Um,
well, I usually interject if I'm going to use somebody's name, I'll usually say something like, "Look, I'm not the first guy to think this thought.
exactly.
I think it was X Y Z. It was Douglas Murray, or it was Elon Musk who said blah blah blah. But I think it's totally true.
Mhm.
So yeah, totally credit people because they're going to find out, or they're going to think after the conversation, hey, wait, I've heard that line before.
But the other thing is, though, for people who are not as confident with being like, you know what, I think climate change is a thing, even though everyone should say be confident, it's actually a way to say, I'm not saying this. This is actually, what other people have talked about. And I just want to put that idea out here. And for some people who aren't as confident with like putting out, controversial ideas or statements, it might be one way for them to kind of buffer the reaction that they might get from the other people that they're having conversation with, which is to say, George Packer, he's a writer for The Atlantic. He's the one who said this, but, and then you talk about what the idea is that he's conceived of, that you say, you know what, I actually appreciate that. And that's why I'm talking to you about this idea. The other thing is, if I actually can't remember who has said something, I always try to remember where I've got something. But if I can't, the line I will always use is, my understanding is, and then I insert whatever the topic is, the fact, the idea, whatever it might be. Some might be talking about the U.S. response to coronavirus. And I say, well, my understanding is that insert whatever someone has said. If I can't remember it, that's how I'll start a statement. Which I don't know. Maybe that's like I don't know. Maybe that's like what a PR person would write for someone. But I guess I'm a PR person too, so that's how I talk.
That's interesting. I want to say something that ties in. Sorry, this conversation is never going to end, but
Oh, it's all good.
This gets me on to a thought of going into a conversation. I like to argue ideas, but I don't like to argue. Like I don't like screaming matches. I don't like people shouting at each other. So, but often, as we've talked about, when look, if you have to quote someone to sort of couch it so it's not coming from you, probably you're about to say something, fairly contentious that, there might be argument. And you're never going to, you should never really go into a conversation hoping to win an argument. That literally never happens. Like no one in the history of humankind has ever said, you know what? You totally changed my thinking in the span of 10 seconds. I completely renounce my former beliefs. Thank you. That's never going to happen. So I think the best you can hope for actually is months later, maybe years. That person will come up to you and they'll say, or they'll actually say the thing that you said those months or years ago, and usually I just let it go. But sometimes I'll ask them, oh, how did you know that? It's like, oh, I've just been thinking about it for a while. And it's like it takes a while for the gears to turn, and you don't quite know how the mind works. But I think if you were in a particular mood and you wanted to win an argument, well, there's an easy way to know if you've won. And the person gets shrill. They start interrupting you. They start throwing out stuff that they just made up on the spot, or you're pretty sure, and they're not even conscious necessarily that they made it up. They literally think they know this fact that you can look up. You can Google it that night. It's like, no, that never happened. Anyways, so yeah, I was arguing with someone about climate change just because, again, I was in a stupid mood. And, I never let an argument get very far because I like to have fun, but I don't like outright hostility. So, if you say a fact and then they just get up in their chair, maybe stand up and get very shrill, how can you think that? You won. You're done. You won. If that was your objective, you win. You're not going to get a trophy, and maybe you won't be as good friends with that person. But I guess if that's what you're going for.
Totally. And I have one last thing just on this note. Again, it actually it ties to the fact that we're giving advice, sort of, and it ties to the fact or the point I made earlier about quoting people. So I think it's a good thing for me to end with. There's an investor / writer / thinker named Naval Ravikant, and he says this thing all the time because he's always giving advice. But he also always says all advice cancels to zero. And when he says that, he basically means that, like, you go to one doctor, they're going to tell you this. You go to another doctor, they're going to tell you this, right? And I think that goes with the same as us. Like, depending on the situation you're in, our advice might not apply, right? So remember that. You're going to have both sides of advice depending on who you talk to. So think about that and really think deep into, like, okay, like, well, what am I trying to achieve? And, like, what are my values? And why might this advice apply to me, and why might it not? But you really need to have a strong sense of, like, okay, well, what am I out to accomplish here, right?
Yeah. Well, I think it just goes to critical thinking and, figuring out, like, again, we are not the be all end all experts ad infinitum of public speaking. We've picked up a few things, some pearls of wisdom, some bits of experience that hopefully you'll find useful. So to those who are listening, I hope you have found this useful. This has been a ton of fun. William Johnson, if others wanted to find out more about you, learn more about you and maybe at Innovate BC, how would they go about that?
For sure. If you want to learn about Innovate BC and how we help companies start and scale and stay in British Columbia, it's easy. InnovateBC.ca or Google Innovate BC. If you want to connect with me, the easiest way is WilliamJohnson.ca.
How do they subscribe to that Vancouver Tech Journal?
That's also really easy. VanTechJournal.ca.
Very good. Okay. Well, William, as usual, it's been a pleasure. I look forward to talking with you in the future. And you have a great night.
Thanks. Have a good night, Jonathan.
All right.